All right. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to F is for Fires, Floods, and Fossil Fuels, a climate action report card for the BC government. This event tonight is hosted by the BC Climate Emergency Campaign, which is a joint initiative of civil society organizations anxious about the climate emergency who are collaborating to increase the ambition of climate policy and action in so-called British Columbia. As people are still arriving, I would like to invite you to put your name and location in the chat, including the name of the Indigenous territories in which you reside. My name is Emiko Newman. I am the coordinator of the BC Climate Emergency Campaign. Whether you have been a signatory of our campaign from the very beginning, or you just signed on this week, or you're joining us tonight as a member of the public, I want to say a huge thank you for joining us. We're really amazed by all the interest that this session has generated, and it shows that this is clearly a topic people care about and want to engage with. So we're really excited that you've taken this time to join us and learn more about climate action in BC. We'll be starting off the evening with the launch of our climate action report card, which is addressed to the BC government. And the report card is the result of a joint effort between campaign members, although it was largely headed by Tracy Saxby of My Sea to Sky, who did an absolutely fantastic job of putting it together. She'll be starting off providing some context to the report card and helping us to walk through each of the 10 actions which are listed there. Also, tonight, you can expect to hear from a lawyer at EcoJustice, Matt Hulse, and he's going to be sharing information about a lawsuit that was put forward by the Sierra Club. They are taking the BC government to court for their inadequate climate change accountability report. After that, we'll be launching our new website for the first time, and we will close off with some calls to action to get people engaged and to give you some ideas of what you can do once this call is over. So without further ado, Tracy, I'm going to pass it over to you to get us started on sharing the climate action report card.
All right, I'm going to just share my screen here. It is so exciting to see so many people that have joined us this evening. I'm going to talk just a very little bit about the climate action report card that we've initiated. As you heard from Emiko, F is for fires, floods, and fossil fuels. And we'll be going into each of the grades, handing it over to a number of different presenters to speak to each of the climate actions that we have issued. So as you know, this open letter was first published in September 2021. With more than 200 organizational signatories, and it was released. And shortly after that, we have experienced a year of a climate emergency like no other climate emergency that I've experienced in the 20 years that I've been living in BC. So this is a progress report to evaluate how the BC government is doing on implementing these 10 urgent climate actions. So we know from world scientists that massive scale climate action is urgently needed. And what is very exciting about this open letter is that we now have more than 450 signatories that collectively represent over 2 million British Columbians. So this is the overall grade for each of the 10 urgent climate actions. Just to tell you a little bit about the grades, we've got 3 grades and then an unknown. So a fail meant that there were no substantive policies or actions implemented to support the climate action and that the BC government is not on a path to succeed. Progress means that policies or actions are in progress to support this climate action, but there's likely more work to do. Complete means success. The policies or actions have been implemented. And unknown means that data is currently unavailable or policies or actions are still pending. We're yet to find out where things are at. So I'm going to walk you through the very first urgent climate action, which is to set binding climate targets based on science and justice. The current status of this is a fail. We know that to limit temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius, we need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by roughly 7.5% every year between now and 2030. But BC has consistently failed to meet its greenhouse gas emission reduction targets for over a decade. And we have just updated the latest greenhouse gas emissions for BC. And while there was a slight reduction in 2020, it's unlikely that that was due to any long-term emission reductions. It's more likely that that was due to the pandemic. So we have a long way to go to achieve our climate targets that are based on science and justice. And right now, BC's current climate targets are a long way off from what we actually need to do to commit to targets that are based on science or justice. So I'm going to hand it off now to Seth, who's going to speak to number 2.
Hi, folks. Great to be with you, and so great to see so many of you. So the second urgent action in our open letter a year ago, number 2, was to invest in a thriving, regenerative, zero-emission economy. And we defined that to mean that we should be spending 2% of BC's GDP, which is equivalent to about $6 billion a year, on climate action, climate infrastructure, climate mitigation measures. We also said that it should include new Crown enterprises to drive the change that's needed, and that the economic component of Indigenous titles needed to be recognized through sharing of benefits and revenues with the kind of initiatives and enterprises that we create to get this job done. Sadly, this one we ranked as a fail. We are not spending as a province 2% of GDP on meeting this goal. It's closer to 1/5 that, about 1.2 billion according to the BC government itself. So we are off by about a 5-fold order of magnitude. We have not been creating brash new Crown corporations to drive change and get the job done. The one flagship Crown corporation or new entity that the government has created, the Centre for Innovation and Clean Energy, is a joint initiative with Shell Canada. And most of its research agenda seems to be driven by the interests of Shell Canada, with a special focus on carbon capture and storage and a hydrogen strategy. But otherwise, we're not seeing new Crown enterprises to drive change. And there doesn't appear to be any vision to speak of to share revenues with Indigenous nations as we make this change. And now moving over to target or action number 3, I'm going to throw it over to Kainagata.
Thanks a lot, Seth. Hi, everybody. I'm calling in tonight from Gitxsan territory in northern BC. And in the valley where I live, there are 2 massive fracked gas pipelines already permitted by the BC government that would run through Gitxsan and Gitniao territory. And another one, in addition to Coastal GasLink, that would run south of the highway through Wet'suwet'en territory. And when you add up all of those new pipelines that already have permits from the BC government, their total capacity is 3 times the fracking production, the gas production in BC right now. And so if all of those were to be built, we would be looking at quadrupling our gas production in BC, and that's obviously incompatible with winding down our emissions. So there's no clear signal, there's no clear plan or end date from the BC government to stop approving new oil and gas infrastructure. And in fact, this government has approved roughly government, like its predecessor, that meets extensively with oil and gas lobbyists. And the estimate of for that is about 80 meetings a month with government officials and elected officials. So we are clearly on the wrong track when it comes to approving and sending signals to these companies to propose new oil and gas installations. And if you add up Woodfibre LNG, the Fortis Tilbury proposal, and all of the expansion in domestic hookups, Fortis hooked up 10,000 new homes and businesses last year. We are clearly off track. So there are some bright signs. There are some sort of silver linings. The government has made some commitments around eliminating methane emissions, which you can see there. But again, that's hard to square with a plan to massively expand the fracking industry. Sounds like my connection is a little choppy, so I will pass it off to Sven Biggs to talk about commitment number 4.
Thanks, Kai. Commitment number 4 was to end fossil fuel subsidies and make polluters pay a fair share to address climate damage. This is the first action that we gave the government a progress grade on. That was largely because that in May of this year, they canceled what are known as deep well royalty credits, which was the largest single fossil fuel subsidy in British Columbia. Unfortunately, even with the cancellation of that program, BC still has the second highest provincial fossil fuel subsidies in the country, second to only Alberta. So there's still a lot of work to be done in this area. I especially want to call attention to subsidies that are going to start coming online as LNG terminals do. Things like paying a lower carbon tax rate than the rest of British Columbians, getting breaks on PST, corporate tax, and paying lower electricity rates than other industrial users. All these packages are designed to make fossil fuels extra profitable at a time when these companies are reporting a record profit. So there's still so much to be done to meet this commitment and to put our government on track to meet global commitments around ending fossil fuel subsidies. With that, I'm going to pass it on to Josh to talk about our 5th action.
Hello, everyone. My name is Josh. I'm with the Union of BC Union Chiefs. I'm calling in from Ottawa tonight. And so I'm talking about the 5th commitment to leave no one behind, which we also gave a grade of progress. In terms of the government's collaboration with Indigenous peoples on climate action, so BC has provided some new funding streams for climate action in First Nations communities in the province. It's not enough, but it is a start, I suppose. And it has supported the First Nations Leadership Council to come up with a climate strategy rooted in the priorities of First Nations, which was released this year and is included in the report card document. BC also did put out an action plan this past year to implement the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. That has pieces in there committing to collaborating with nations on conservation, clean energy development, revenue sharing, and all that sort of stuff. But it really remains to be seen how any of that will look in practice and how closely it's going to resemble anything that we would recognize as self-determination, especially as it relates to Indigenous peoples' internationally recognized rights to manage the resources in their territories. We also gave a failing grade to supporting fossil fuel workers because there's no real alternative economic plan for fossil fuel workers in BC at this point, or for communities that are dependent on the sector. There's no gesture of support for transitioning through a managed wind down of the industry because there's still no intention to wind down the industry at all, which lets gas companies continue to be the only game in town. And as far as we can tell, there's not a lot of will to use the profits coming out of BC's gas fields to develop something else that's less dependent on fossil fuels. And so there will come a time when natural gas demand does peak and begins to decline, and the longer that the BC government delays on providing tangible investments in alternatives to such a fossil fuel dependent economy, the more expensive and disruptive that transition is going to be. And in terms of supporting vulnerable communities from the impacts of climate change, I assume everyone on the call has seen now how BC was not at all prepared for any of the major climate disasters that happened in the last year. The supports just aren't there yet to prevent needless suffering in our communities from the impacts of climate change because, in part, the risk of those things happening wasn't accounted for at all, and it still isn't. So infrastructure was vulnerable, communities were vulnerable, and a lot of people died recently. So, and I recognize that a lot of this a lot of these climate impacts are happening sooner than a lot of people thought, and with a lot more intensity. But after this past year, that can no longer be the government's excuse the next time something major happens from a climate-driven impact. And so I will pass it along to Peter to move on to the next commitment.
Thanks so much, Josh. This commitment is around protecting and restoring nature. And we called on the government to protect 30% of terrestrial and marine ecosystems by 2030, which is in line with what the federal government has promised. Unfortunately, BC is massively behind on protecting nature. It's only got about half that goal in terms of land and about a tenth of it in terms of marine protected areas. The BC government has identified 2.6 million hectares of old growth logging that it wants to defer from logging or proposes to defer from logging. But unfortunately, it is still allowing logging in many of these deferral areas. And the big piece of this is that it has not offered any money in compensation for First Nations to be able to go ahead and agree with protection in their territory. So essentially BC, if it wants to protect nature, is asking First Nations communities to do that by taking money out of their pockets, which we think is unacceptable. So we gave them a failing grade on protecting and restoring nature, and it's important to recognize, counter to what many MLAs would say, those deferral areas are not protection. And the BC government has not moved to permanently protect any of those 2.6 million hectares that they have identified. So that unfortunately is a fail, and we hope that that can turn around, because obviously protecting and restoring nature is incredibly important for carbon sequestration. I will pass on to Tracy for regenerative agriculture.
So I'm going to ask everybody to bear with me because this is not my area of expertise. But this is action number 7, to invest in local, organic, regenerative agriculture and food systems, which includes incentivizing carbon storage in soil, restoring biodiversity, ensuring food sovereignty and food security across the province, increasing consumption of plant-based foods, reducing food waste, and supporting Indigenous communities that wish to maintain traditional food systems and enhance their food security. We're already experiencing the impacts on food security in British Columbia. For example, heat waves and severe flooding have damaged crops and killed farm animals in 2021. Warmer stream temperatures and droughts have affected salmon spawning in 2022, and increasing ocean acidification is impacting coastal fisheries. Food security is a very real concern, and this is something that a lot of people don't understand. When we're talking about climate impacts, there is a very high risk that we are not going to be able to feed ourselves, and in future we are going to be fighting to survive and fighting to feed ourselves. This action did get a grade of progress. The BC government has committed to enhance agricultural carbon sequestration and to improve soil health and biodiversity. There is a commitment to encourage regenerative agricultural practices, and they are currently developing a food security policy framework to mitigate climate impacts on food security. And there's also a commitment to support Indigenous communities in upholding Indigenous food sovereignty in the climate preparedness and adaptation strategy. But there is a lot more work still to do. There's no plan to increase consumption of plant-based foods, which is a major way of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. There's no plan to reduce food waste. And construction of Site C Dam will impact over 31,500 hectares of high value agricultural land, which is a very poor decision, given that it is highly probable that California won't be able to continue to provide the food resources that it does to BC in the near future. And I am passing it over to Eric Doherty.
Hello, thank you. I'm going to be talking about point 8, accelerating the transition to zero emissions transportation. And this is actually a very interesting piece where there's been actually some remarkable progress with a new Clean BC target to reduce distances traveled by light duty vehicles 25% by 2030. This is an important and very ambitious target, which sets the standard for other provinces and even US states to follow. The problem is that we haven't seen, it's been a full year since this has happened, and we haven't seen any action whatsoever to try to meet this target, or even set out when the plan to meet this target will come out. We've also seen progress in that the transit is now free for children 12 and younger. The big fail is that there's no commitment to reallocate infrastructure funds from highway expansion to public transit and active transportation. So we've got a situation where the provincial government has set a really, really strong target. But at the same time, they're expanding highways, spending billions and billions of dollars of federal and provincial money to expand highways for increased, when their target says we're going to have less. Basically, we've seen something very interesting here. We're waiting for the follow through. We haven't seen it. And I'm going to read the quote from the bottom. Transformative changes in the transportation sector are needed to meet climate targets, from the IPCC 6th assessment report. And with that, I'm just going to pass it over to Seth Klein for Action 9.
Right. Thanks, Eric. Action 9 is me again. And Action 9 was the call to accelerate the transition to zero emission buildings, specifically to ban new natural gas connections to all new and existing buildings by the end of this year, and to create a Crown Corporation to mobilize the workforce to retrofit all existing buildings and eliminate fossil fuel heating by 2035, and to build new affordable zero emission buildings. Afraid this one got a fail as well. Not only have we not seen what we called for, but I think we lack confidence that the government has a plan to even hit its own building targets. Notably, Premier-designate David Eby said in his opening press conference that he didn't want, that we couldn't have new fossil fuel infrastructure and meet our targets. Connecting gas lines to new buildings is new fossil fuel infrastructure. There's a strong contrast here between the city of Vancouver and the province. In the city of Vancouver, no new buildings can use fossil fuels for space and water heating as of this year, whereas with the province, the target for that isn't until 2030, far too long. Many of the groups that are brought together here, at the same time as this, our big open letter was published a year ago, a smaller group of about 30 organizations issued a much quieter letter to then Housing Minister Eby, saying that new buildings should be prevented from tying into gas, and basically nothing came of it. The government's approach has been instead to let municipalities decide if they want to move faster than 2030. That is an approach that is far too cumbersome. It's far too confusing. It's confusing for builders. The other thing that we've witnessed is FortisBC aggressively moving us in the other direction. The roadmap to 2030 that the government released, its updated Clean BC plan a year ago, said that they would be ending rebates for fossil appliances. And yet a year later, Fortis continues to inundate us with ads for rebates for gas appliances, almost taunting the government a year later. As Kai mentioned earlier, basically Fortis continues to tie up over 10,000 new homes a year to gas. So they are running circles around the province and making a mockery of our targets here. And we've seen no new Crown enterprises, as alluded to earlier, to drive the decarbonization of buildings. In light of all this, I actually have an associated ask that we want to share, which is we're zeroing in on the call for the government to ban new buildings from tying into gas. And we've got a new open letter just focused on that. And I'm going to put in the chat right now a link to the Google form where we invite all of your organizations to sign on to that specific letter. So if you go to that link with the Google form, you'll see a link to the letter and then a form where you can add, just to be clear, this isn't for individuals, this is for organizations to put their name to a letter calling on the incoming premier and whoever the new ministers, relevant ministers will be when he announces a new cabinet, to take us all out of our misery and ban new buildings from tying into gas. And with that, I will throw it over to Matt Hulst at EcoJustice for the last action.
Thanks, Seth. So this last action is to track and report progress on these actions every year and embedding these actions in legislation to ensure accountability, transparency, and inclusion, and establishing rolling 5-year carbon budgets that decline over time towards zero emissions by 2040 or sooner. Carbon budgets, you may be familiar with the term, but if not, it's basically a concept where the government determines a set amount of emissions that can be released in over a certain period of time. Often it's 3 or 5 years. And the goal is that that amount declines every 5 years, reaching basically zero by a certain date. Here we're saying 2040. It's slightly different than a carbon emissions target, which just sets a pinpoint in time for us to reach. And carbon budgets better help us manage our emissions over a longer period of time. So the outcome on this action is a fail, as you can see. The government has not embedded the climate actions, the majority of climate actions that we're asking for in legislation, and it has not established a rolling 5-year carbon budgets into the future. And a key, additional item to underscore this failure is that BC has been taken to court by the Sierra Club of BC for failing to comply with the Climate Change Accountability Act when drafting the most recent Climate Change Accountability Report. And the report is a requirement of the Act, and the Act specifies the information that the report should include. And the key thing that Sierra Club took BC to court about was the fact that the report does not provide plans to continue progress towards BC's 2025, 2040, 2050 targets and the 2030 oil and gas sector target, which means that the BC government has a plan to reduce emissions, but there is no explanation of how that plan gets BC to each of those targets, which leaves the public unable to hold BC accountable for its progress towards these targets. Now, BC does explain how far the plan will get the province to the 2030 target, and it says it'll get it all the way. And we may dispute this, I'm sure many on this call will. That wasn't the focus of the litigation, however. It was around the rest of the 8 targets. So there's 8 targets in the legislation. BC only really points its progress to one of those targets. Emiko, should I go further into this? Because it really is part of my discussion around the litigation. I can wait if you have another section in mind before I go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, I think you can go right into it.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, I guess to say there's a lot to say on this, but BC needs to follow its own legislation if it wants to call itself a climate leader. And so far, it hasn't done this. And it's important to note that BC's targets are not binding on the government of BC. There are no consequences on BC or the Minister of Environment, who's responsible for overseeing them, if BC doesn't meet its targets. So the only accountability mechanism in the legislation is this annual progress report, the Climate Change Accountability Act. And this report, as I've said, is required to have certain information about BC's emissions, what BC plans to do to reduce emissions, and this key provision, which is plans to continue progress towards achieving the targets. And this in our interpretation, Sierra Club's interpretation, this requires an explanation of what BC's climate plan, as currently drafted, will do to get how far it will get BC to each of its targets. So this should be, or could be, a numeric explanation of progress, such as it will get BC 80% of the way to the 2025 targets, or 40% of the way to the 2050 targets. With this type of information, the BC public and NGOs such as yourselves are better placed to hold the government accountable for the adequacy of these plans. We may agree or disagree that 80%, a plan that gets us 80% of the way to the 2025 target is adequate. If we don't agree, we can pressure the government in a number of ways to improve that plan and suggest the policies to fill in that plan into the future. So if we win, we'll get an understanding in the next climate accountability report of what BC's plan does for each of the targets, which will expose the policy gap, the void that exists between what we have on paper now and where we need to go into the future. And hopefully that provides each of you an opportunity to tell the government exactly how you think they should fill that policy gap and suggest ways that they can reduce their emissions beyond what are currently in the climate plan. Now, if we lose, it will be because the court has decided that the way the act is written does not require the minister in his report to provide the type of information, transparent information about BC's progress to each of its targets, which means the act needs to be revised. So it will, if we lose, it's not the end of this story. It's just move on to the next phase, which is amend the legislation to ensure that it does what BC said it would do when it first drafted it back in 2018, 2019, and improve the language in the act so that it does allow us to hold the government accountable when they fail to draft plans that will get us to our targets. Now, that being said, we think there are glaring gaps there are a number of ways that the legislation can be improved, regardless of how the litigation goes, such as, for example, ensuring that there is a net zero target in the act that is not based on, well, first of all, that a net zero target exists, and second of all, that the target does not depend on carbon capture, but is dependent on emission reductions. We also would like to see more criteria around what should be in a climate plan, who should be consulted in developing the plan, how often the plan should be amended and updated, which is all lacking from the current legislation. And finally, to ensure that the Climate Solutions Council, our independent advisory body, has the information, the mandate, expertise, and capacity to provide proper oversight, meaningful oversight of the government's climate plan and progress towards its targets. So David Eby, as he moves into his new position, we should take this opportunity in the coming weeks and months to remind him of the promise that BC made to introduce a net zero emissions target in 2050, and use that opportunity to improve the Act in a number of ways, not only to increase accountability, but also provide more certainty and clarity around climate planning into the future. Thanks, Nico.
Thank you so much, Matt. I'm just seeing in the chat that somebody is asking, when is this court case to be ruled on?
So the court has about 6 months to draft its decision. I should say that the judge was very interested in the case. He had clearly read the materials in advance, which doesn't always happen, and asked some very good questions to not only our council, but to BC's council, and it suggested that he was really understanding the case that we were bringing, and which gives us some motivation and encouragement that the judge was clocking on to the key issue that was before him. So that was encouraging. But 6 months from the court date, or from the hearing, which puts it about February, March for a decision. Could be sooner, fingers crossed.
Great, thanks, Matt. Thank you so much for sharing that. Tracy, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Right, I'm just going to share my screen one more time and just briefly take everybody through the last few pages of the report. So Josh Kyoki from UBCIC has also just shared that BC First Nations have a climate strategy and action plan. And this is separate to what we have called for, but it's really important to highlight because Indigenous peoples are most impacted by climate change, despite taking care of the land for time immemorial. There's some amazing quotes in here by Kupik Judy Wilson, who's the Secretary Treasurer of the Union of BC Indian Chiefs. The other thing that I just wanted to highlight really briefly is we have had a year of devastating climate impacts in BC. So since this open letter was first published in September 2021, BC has experienced 2 atmospheric rivers, severe flooding that has inundated entire communities, washed away homes and drowned hundreds of thousands of farm animals, landslides that destroyed homes, roads, railways and bridges, leaving 18,000 people stranded and 5 people dead, billions of dollars in infrastructure damage, and the estimated cost of recovery is over $9 billion just to recover from the floods and the landslides alone. Severe drought this year. The Sunshine Coast has declared a state of emergency because there's not enough fresh water supplies. Tens of thousands of stranded salmon have failed to spawn this year because of extremely low water in rivers and streams. We experienced nearly 1,600 wildfires again in 2022. And Vancouver had the worst air quality in the world due to wildfire smoke. The inquiry was completed into the June 2021 heat dome and reported that 1,619 people died thanks to extreme temperatures, and most of those people were seniors. The town of Lytton is still rebuilding after the fire that burned the town to the ground. And the climate impacts on Indigenous communities have been exacerbated by the jurisdictional gaps and the provision of emergency services to First Nations, as well as the legacy of colonization. But there is a spark of hope, because all of this work that we have been doing together, because of all of the people that have signed on to this open letter, the ask that we have called for, these 10 urgent climate action asks, have been picked up by others. And as a direct result of that, David Eby, when he was outlining his priorities or stated priorities when he became Premier Designate, he said that we cannot continue to subsidize fossil fuels and expect clean energy to manifest somehow. We cannot continue to expand fossil fuel infrastructure and hit our climate goals, and that our legislated climate targets are of significant importance, and that these are targets that he wants the province to hit. So this is a very big shift in narrative from the province, and this is a very real opportunity for all of us to encourage David Eby to commit to what he has said, to make these actions real. And so just as a call to action, we now have over 450 signatories that represent over 2,100,000 British Columbians that are calling on the BC government to confront the climate emergency. This is huge. This is huge. This is thanks to each and every one of you that has been out there recruiting signatories, asking friends that own businesses to sign, asking other organizations that you're assigned, asking your faith group to sign, your labor union to sign. This is something to celebrate. We are building power together, and we will keep building power together. And so this is an updated version of the open letter, and the letter as it was published last year, with the more than 450 signatories, which is just incredible. And if you know of any other businesses or organizations that would like to sign, or if you haven't signed yet, Amika will be sharing the opportunity to do that in the chat. We are still recruiting signatories, so please ask your friends and family to, if they own a business, or ask your faith group, or ask your labor union to consider signing on. This is an incredible movement, and I'm grateful to each and every one of you for being part of it.
Thanks so much, Tracy, and thanks to all of you who helped walk us through the report card. Also, thank you, Tracy, for spending so much time on making it look so beautiful. If you're all wondering, okay, we have this report card, what are we going to do with it now? We'll be getting to that at the end of the call. Seth and Peter are going to be walking us through some calls to action and how we can actually take this report card to the government and put some pressure on them. So we'll be getting back to that later on in the evening. For now, we're going to switch gears a little bit and be launching our brand new website, which I'm very excited about. I'm hoping that it will be kind of a central hub for compiling news about the campaign and information about it in one central place. And without further ado, I would like to present it. So here we are. You'll see that we have some scary wildfire imagery going on. This is an emergency after all. I'm not going to go through every page for people here, but just give you a rough overview. We've also interspersed it with hopeful images because there's always hope in this work as well. If you go to the campaign page, this is where you can find out what we're all about. If you're a signatory of ours, or if you haven't heard about us until today or just recently and you want to learn more, I encourage you to check out this page. It tells you who we are, it tells you what makes us unique. It lays out the problem that we are facing. And then it goes on to talk about the solution. So I encourage you to take a look at this page to find out more about the campaign. You can also find out more about our team. So the BC Climate Emergency Campaign consists of a steering committee, many of whom you've just heard from, taking us through the report card. We also have a full table, which is a group of about 60 organizations or so. We then have smaller working groups who are focused on the individual actions themselves. And we have that whole list of signatories, which Tracy just was showing us, that we've just reached 450 signatories, which is very exciting. So if you go on this page, you can find out more about the members who are in the steering committee. You can find out about the full table, the working groups, etc. And if you're here today thinking, I'd love to get more involved in the campaign, I would love for my organization to have a say in what's happening and to stay updated, we would love for you to reach out and join the full table. And how you can do that is if you go to the Contact Us page. I'd like to draw your attention to here. If you submit a message through here, it will go directly to me and I will respond as soon as I can. We'd love to hear from you, even if you have some questions about the campaign, maybe you have some suggestions, or you want to get involved, please reach out. We have a page covering the 10 actions. You can find out more about them here. Tracy and others just walked us through. You can see our whole list of signatories on this page. And every month we'll be updating to show our latest ones. We actually had 4 more than what you see here, but it was a bit too much to put up here. So I'll be adding those in, but we're very excited that we've reached such a high number. And as Tracy mentioned, we're always looking to add more. So we would love to have your support on that. On the website is also where you can find the report card. And if you go here, it'll take you right to it. Here it is. So it's obviously a web version, but we'll be talking later on about the opportunity of printing it out, bringing it to your MLA. We'll get to that later. We feature news articles. You can see press releases. Tomorrow morning, we will be releasing a press release, so keep an eye out for that. And I will be sending that out by email. There's an events page, and then I'll just draw your attention to the Take Action button here. If you click on that, it will tell you how to get more involved, how to sign the letter, and this will take you to the Google form where you can sign on to our open letter and show your support for the 10 actions. So that's the website in a nutshell. I would encourage you to take a closer look through it on your own time. And let me just stop sharing here. So I'm just going to pop the link to the site into the chat so everybody has it. Hopefully that works. So there you have it. I'm really excited that we now have this website because we didn't have one previously. And if you're interested in helping us recruit more signatories, send them the website. Easy for them to learn more about the campaign that way. Easy for them to access the report card, to see our whole list of signatories. So it's really exciting. And I hope you'll all take some time later on to get more acquainted with it. So, wow, we're very ahead of schedule, and we're going to be moving on to the final portion of the evening, which is where we're going to be sharing some calls to action. So hopefully all of the folks joining us tonight are feeling the energy, are feeling excited, and are wondering, what can I do? So this is where we're going to be providing a bunch of examples of specific actions that you can take, especially trying to draw on the momentum of this report card and trying to get it out into the world. So I'm going to pass it over back to Seth Klein and Peter McCartney, and they're going to be talking about our calls to action. So Seth.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I just want to say a huge congratulations to Emiko, the coordinator of the BC Climate Emergency campaign. For all of together today and for the website. You now have the link. One of the things that's been so fabulous about working with the BC Climate Emergency campaign is how many organizations have really stepped forward and shared the load together. That was the good news. The bad news is that as our stuff was spread out all over the place, some stuff was posted with My Sea to Sky, and some of it was with Dogwood, and some of it was with Stand, and some of it was with us. So now with Emiko's work, we have it all living in one place on this new website. Also, just an immense congratulations to Tracy Saxby for the report that we've released today, which looks beautiful. The content is there. I really think people are going to find it a useful tool to work with. It looks beautiful, but the picture it paints is not pretty. And that's the context I just want to offer of where we find ourselves. For the last year and a half since the BC Climate Emergency Campaign came together, we've done some remarkable work together. But the truth is, our joint effort has been stuck despite all of our efforts and marshaling this extraordinary list of signatory organizations advocating together for a clear and compelling set of climate emergency actions. We hit up against a wall located basically in the Premier's office, Premier Horgan's office. Then we had the Apadarai campaign for BC NDP leadership, which really showed, I think, the political muscle of the climate movement. And we got their attention. However any of us feel about the outcome of that, we have their attention. We showed the huge appetite for a renewed, robust climate plan. I think the government is feeling sensitive and a bit defensive about their own Clean BC plan. And I think also as a result of Anjali's campaign, Dave Eby is now saying what you saw in that quote at the end of the report, that new fossil fuel infrastructure is simply not compatible with meeting our greenhouse gas reduction targets. That is great news, but it's only a start. We need a stronger and clear climate emergency plan for our province. Now, we're no longer going to have the chance to insert that call and this report card into the NDP leadership race. That's over. But we will be getting a newish government. There's going to be a new cabinet. There's going to be new ministers and an opening to force government to up its game. Next month, November, is going to be the anniversary of that horrific atmospheric river event that Tracy talked about. Next February, there will be a new budget, the first EB budget. So we need all MLAs and cabinet members to hear our call for a clear and strong plan. They need to hear that message that we want these Fs transformed into As. And Peter McCartney is now going to offer some specific actions that you can take to help us realize that goal. Over to you, Peter.
Thanks, Seth. Yeah, first of all, I will just reiterate, every signatory we get on this helps us show the government that we have the broad support of the BC public. So if you can think of your favorite coffee shop, your hockey team, anybody that can sign this open letter, please reach out. The next thing we want folks to do to get this report in front of people is to print it off, take it to your MLA's office. If you can find it on the website, you can print it and then take it right down to their constituency office. And we're asking folks to deliver it personally to their MLA, take a selfie outside of their constituency office or with them if they're up for it, and hashtag it BC Poly and climate emergency. Make sure that they know that the climate movement is watching and that these actions that we've called for over a year now have not happened. And then while you're there, I'm going to ask that that you book a meeting with your MLA and that you can sit down with them. I am happy to coach and support you with whatever you need to be able to sit down with your MLA and tell them exactly why Clean BC is not living up to the promises that were made in 2018 when it was first released. So if you are up for meeting with your MLA, if that sounds like something you might be interested in, we've got a whole guide prepared to help folks and sort of cut through the government spin and the talking points. And you'll probably know more about this issue than your MLA. when you sit down with them, that's really the goal. So reach out to me at peter@wildernesscommittee.org if you're interested in meeting up with your MLA once you've delivered them the report card. And then the last piece of the puzzle here is that we do want folks to be able to act tonight. It's always more fun and more efficient when we act together. And so we're actually just going to take a couple minutes here, and I'm encouraging you to send this report and a note to your MLA via email or to a journalist in your community that you know, that and draw this to their attention so that their staff know, so that the media knows, and so that we've got this on their radar when it hits our press release is released tomorrow. So Amiko, I
Yeah.
think you've got some music to cue up with folks.
Yes, actually, if I could quickly jump in though, before we move on to that, I just wanted to quickly launch a poll, because as our steering committee was brainstorming about how we wanted to get this report card out there, we came up with a potential idea, which was to basically print out a massive poster-sized version of the report card and take it to government. So whether that would be outside David Eby's office or even the provincial legislature in Victoria, we thought that organizing a rally and bringing people together and kind of, symbolically delivering this report card could be impactful. And we haven't specifically planned that event yet. We wanted to gauge interest and see if the folks here, for instance, would be excited by an idea such as that and would have the capacity to get their organization involved to help mobilize. So since you're all here right now, I wanted to just put that question out to you. I put together a quick poll, so you should be able to see it now. And we just want to know, would you be interested in something like that? If there's a lot of interest, we can get started on the planning. Okay, it looks, I don't think people can see the results. Okay, no, okay, it's just me. There's a lot of interest, a lot of people saying that it would depend where and when, but overwhelmingly looks like people are interested. So that's really encouraging. Yeah, I think it needs to be big as well, definitely. And, literally and figuratively. So great. This is good to know. In that case, keep an eye out for more information on an event like this. Okay, amazing. Okay, I'm going to end that poll. Actually, just a moment. Okay. Okay, perfect. Thanks, everyone. All right, great. So now, as Peter said, we're going to move on to an action that we can all take right now. We wanted to include in this session tonight something that we could all do literally together at the same time. And we'll just provide a few minutes for everyone to do so. But as Peter mentioned, we want you to take this time to get an email started to your MLA, or if you know of a journalist or a news outlet in your area, you can send this report card over to them, and who knows, maybe they would be able to publish that. So we have a website here where you should be able to find the contact information for your MLA. There it is. And what you can do is go over to our website. As I just said, you can find the report card there. And I think as I said, we're very much ahead of schedule. So we'll take, I think, about 5 minutes or so for folks to get started on an email. And maybe this is something that you've never done before, but have always been interested in taking a little bit more action. So this is your chance. Anything you wanted to add to that, Peter?
Oh, that sounds great. Let's all do this together and take a moment to write our MLAs and journalists in our community.
Okay, and then we'll come back together for the closing. And that will be in about 5 or so minutes. I will put on some music, so we'll see you back soon.
Trisha's asking if there's a template or if you have a suggestion maybe of the subject line and or a quick message that you think we should send along with the link to the report card.
Well, I would say as a former reporter, everyone likes to feel like they're getting a heads up on something. So maybe if you're sending a message tonight, you could say heads up on a report card that's going to be released tomorrow. And that could be to an MLA's office or to a reporter.
Thanks, Kai. Great suggestion. Okay, we'll see you back in 5 minutes. Okay, thanks everyone. Bring you all back. Thanks for everyone who shared the MLA that you just emailed. That's really exciting. I'm glad to see that these emails are already getting out there. I'm just trying to keep track of the chat here. As Seth said, alongside the MLAs, if you could think of a local journalist to send this to, getting it out into some news outlets would be fantastic. What else? Just looking through the chat. Tracy Saxby was asking if folks would be interested in getting local governments to sign on to the open letter. I think that is a really intriguing idea, which we could be aiming for. And as Susan mentioned in the chat as well, that the municipal elections just finished. So this is kind of a special opportunity when we have all of these new individuals, mayors and councillors in office who are fresh and hopefully would be willing to listen to their communities. So I think this is a great time to take advantage of that. Great to see all of these MLAs being emailed. And of course, just because the call is going to be ending soon does not mean that you should stop sending the report card out there. So, get the message out to as many MLAs as you can. Let's really try to spread the word as far and wide as possible. There was one question that I received, which was, if you don't have access to a computer, does the climate emergency campaign have a physical address or postal box? We do not. Maybe Seth, would you be able to answer that?
Yeah, we're just virtual. I guess the best thing I can recommend is to get in touch with the campaign via one of the main steering committee organizations, like maybe I have Peter at the Wilderness Committee, or Sven at Stand, or Kai at Dogwood. All of those should work.
Great. Thanks, Seth. So, that actually brings our evening to a close. I think that this was really successful. I'm so excited to see that these emails are getting out there. And I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone who joined us tonight. So great to see all of the excitement here. Share the website far and wide, share the report card far and wide. I hope that this session was educational for you or informative. I hope that you learned something about the climate action taking place or not taking place in British Columbia. And I hope it also gave you a clear sense of our way forward. As we talked about tonight, there is a lot of individual action that you can take. You can help us by doing some outreach and adding to our list of signatories. You can print out the report card and deliver it by hand to your MLA, taking the email a step further. And keep an eye out as well for a potential event where we can actually deliver a massive version of the report card to the new premier. So keep an eye out for that. I will also be sending the recording of this session as soon as it's ready to go. So you can share that with folks as well if you know of others who wanted to be here but were unavailable. And of course, just to end off, we would love to hear from you at any time. So go to the website and send us a message. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have. If you wanted to get more involved with the BC Climate Emergency Campaign, we would love your involvement as well. So that's all for tonight. Another huge thank you to Tracy Saxby for all of her excellent work putting the report card together. And we'll see you next time. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good rest of your night.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Congrats.
Thanks, everybody.
Everyone, thanks everyone. Bye.
Good night.